Second issue I want to discuss is the smoking ban. Okay? Smoking ban has not been much of an issue. It was an issue in the last legislative session, but the Republicans and Democrats aren't talking about it at all. They mostly say it's a done deal. But the smoking ban drives Libertarians up the wall. Okay? It's one of the things we dislike the most. And let me try and explain why that is. I think the smoking ban illustrates the difference between how the market solves problems and how the government solves problems. Now I want to start with, let's start now with the smoking ban. Let's start with how the market solves the problem of allocating the types of restaurants in a town. So if you look at the types of restaurants and names, that's determined by the market, by supply and demand. So if you look around, there are lots of pizza places, there are lots of hamburger places, there are lots of Mexican places. There are fewer Greek places, but there's some. There's fewer seafood places, but there's some. And so the idea is that because lots and lots of people like hamburgers and pizza, well, the market provides a lot of those restaurants. Fewer people like seafood and Greek food, so there are fewer of those restaurants. But the beautiful thing is that anybody, even people whose tastes are in the minority, have a place that they can go and get what they want. Okay? And that's what the market does. Now, similarly, let's talk about how smoking rules in the town were allocated prior to the smoking ban. And this is even prior to the local smoking ban that Ames had. According to the Ames Tribune, it was the market that allocated the smoking rules prior to the smoking ban. According to the Tribune, 65% of the restaurants in Ames did not allow smoking prior to the smoking ban, and 35% did. That is, because most people wanted to eat in a restaurant where they weren't around smoke, the market provided a lot of those. And because there were some people who did want to be able to eat and smoke, well, the market provided fewer of those, but the beautiful thing was, everybody, even people whose tastes were in the minority, had a place where they could go and get what they wanted. And that's the libertarian idea. Well, now the government decided to get involved. Because the majority doesn't like smoking, the legislature passed a law and said, okay, no restaurant can have smoking anymore. The majority gets what it wants, and the minority gets nothing. Now, Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who came to the United States in the 19th century. And he wrote a book that a lot of us had to read in Western Civ, if you took Western Civ in college. That was called Democracy in America. And what he pointed out in that book, what he said was, the thing that Americans really had to worry about with their form of government was what he called the tyranny of the majority. What the tyranny of the majority is that the government could use its power, and the majority through the government, could use its power to restrict the freedom of peaceful people who really aren't harming anybody. Okay? And this is what the smoking ban is. That's exactly what de Tocqueville was talking about when he talked about tyranny of the majority. Here are adult citizens gathered on private property. They're not hurting anybody off that property, but they're prevented from having that property be the way that they want it to be because of the smoking ban. Now, what I get a lot of times when I bring this up is, okay, well, maybe patrons should get to decide where they can, if they can have smoking around them or not. But think about the people who work in these restaurants. I mean, they have to be exposed to the smoke all the time. Don't we have to make smoking illegal to protect their health? Well, that is true. There may be some health risks associated with being exposed to that smoke. And in fact, lots of jobs have health risks associated with them. There are a lot of dangerous jobs out there. Construction work is dangerous. Farm work is dangerous. Many forms of manufacturing are dangerous. Driving is the fourth leading cause of death in the United States, and many people have to drive as part of their job. The reason why people take jobs where there's an element of danger to them is they believe that the rewards of the job outweigh the risks. And in a free society, adult citizens get to make that decision for themselves. They get to decide, how much risk am I willing to tolerate for how much reward? Now, similarly, somebody who works in a restaurant that allows smoking, there are some health risks associated with it, but there may be some benefits from working in such an environment as well. Some people prefer it. The reason they might prefer it is they like the clientele, or they get more tips in a restaurant like that, or probably the most likely reason of all is because they themselves smoke, and they'd like to be able to smoke at work, and they'd feel more comfortable if they could do that. People who work in restaurants should have absolutely as much ability to make the trade-off between the risks of the job and the rewards of the job for themselves as anybody in any other profession. That's what it means to live in a free society. And when you're making that decision for people, you're not living in a free society anymore. Now, when I was at ISU, they have Free Speech Day every year, and one day I think it was the very first Free Speech Day, they invited me to talk on libertarianism. And on Free Speech Day, what they do is they literally have a literal soapbox that you stand on, and the people gather around, and they're actually encouraged to heckle you. You all are being nice, but at this, they're encouraged to heckle you. So there was this guy from the Green Party who was giving me grief pretty unmercifully the whole time that I was talking. And when I said that the smoking ban was a bad thing, he raises his hand, he goes, "What's the difference between smoking around somebody in a restaurant and coming by and punching them in the nose?" And I said, well, you know, no difference at all, actually. You know, when somebody wanted to start a restaurant, they put a big sign out front that said, "At this restaurant, every 10 minutes, somebody comes around and punches you in the nose." And when you go into the restaurant, the waiter says, now you do realize if you eat here, somebody's going to come around every 10 minutes and punch you in the nose, and you want to say, yeah, well, hey, that's just what I'm looking for. Well, I don't see any reason in the world the government should be involved in that. You should be able to do that if you want to. And by similar token, if somebody puts a big sign out front that says smoking's is allowed in this restaurant, well, then what you do in a free society is you don't go in that restaurant. You go to one of the many other restaurants in town that have smoking rules the way you like them. That's the way everybody gets what they want. Now, I had like an hour-long interview with a reporter from the Ames Progressive, and this guy is a really, really liberal guy. And so I try to make the case against the smoking ban to him. Here's what he said, and this is what I get a lot. Well, look, we're paying for people's health care. Well, yeah, we got to restrict anything that could cause some sort of health problems, because otherwise the taxpayer's on the hook for all this. Well, now, a couple of responses to that, and one thing that we never talk about, but we should bring up, it is not, in fact, the fat people and the smokers that are costing us the most money, okay? Yes, for the average 50-year-old smoker or fat person, they are going to have more health expenses than the average 50-year-old who's not a smoker or a fat person. That's true. But the people who are healthy, they're going to die eventually, right? And they're going to have health care costs associated with whatever causes them to die in the end. But if they live till 90, they're going to be collecting Social Security benefits that whole time. Whereas the fat person or the smoker is going to die in their early 60s, and we don't have to pay for their Social Security. Now, it's the end of a free society when you can tell people, well, because you might cost me tax dollars, you can't do that anymore. If we really want to take it to its logical conclusion, it should be, our attitude should be, well, if I'm paying your Social Security, you're darn right I got to tell you whether you get to exercise. You're darn right I got to tell you whether you get to eat vegetables. We should be taxing those things back to the Stone Age if we really cared about saving taxpayers' money. Now, I'm being a little silly here. My real position is, look, what you should say is, first, I think there are other ways to handle the health care problem other than the government doing it. It was handled by private charity for most of our nation's history. And I'm not entirely convinced it couldn't be done again. But the simplest solution, and a better solution than actually restricting people's freedom, is to say, okay, if you're 30% over your ideal weight, or if you are a chronic smoker, then we will not pay for your health care costs. That's much better than saying, you don't get to be free anymore because I have to pay for your health care costs. That's the end of a free society if we allow it. All right, so that's the second issue I want to talk about, the smoking ban.